In this episode, we're going to take the idea of an incident register and treat it as what it really is, which is the memory system of a privacy and security program. When an organization does not keep a reliable record of incidents, it ends up learning the same lessons repeatedly, wasting time reinvestigating old patterns and struggling to explain decisions when questions come later. An incident register is not just a log of bad things that happened, and it is not a spreadsheet that exists to satisfy an auditor. It is a structured record that helps the organization prove it responded responsibly, track what was fixed, and spot patterns that predict future problems. The register also connects incident handling to program performance because it turns isolated events into trend data that can guide investments. For beginners, the register can sound boring, but it is one of the most practical tools in privacy program management because it brings order to chaotic situations. It helps ensure that incidents do not disappear after the immediate emergency is over and that remediation does not fade into good intentions. It also supports fairness and consistency because similar incidents should be handled in similar ways, and a register makes it possible to check that. By the end, you should understand what an incident register contains, why it matters for accountability, and how it powers continuous improvement without becoming a paperwork burden. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful foundation is clarifying what makes an incident register different from a pile of case notes or scattered email threads. Case notes are often unstructured and tied to the people who work the event, which means they can be hard to interpret later and easy to lose. An incident register is structured, meaning it captures a consistent set of fields and decision points so incidents can be compared, searched, and analyzed over time. It should include the basics, like when the incident was discovered, what type of incident it was, and what systems and data types were involved. It should also capture process details, like whether containment occurred, what remediation actions were defined, and whether notifications were required. The structure matters because it forces discipline in the moment and supports learning later. Without structure, each incident is recorded in a different style, and patterns become invisible. Another difference is that a register is meant to stay alive, meaning it is updated as remediation progresses and as findings change, rather than being written once and forgotten. A register also serves multiple audiences, including privacy leadership, security responders, legal reviewers, and auditors, so it must be clear enough that people outside the original response team can understand it. For beginners, it helps to see the register as the place where the organization keeps a consistent story of what happened and what it did about it. Accountability is the first big purpose of an incident register, and accountability depends on being able to show a trail of reasonable decisions. When an incident occurs, many decisions must be made quickly, such as whether the incident is confirmed, what containment actions to take, whether to notify stakeholders, and what remediation is required. Later, someone may ask why a certain decision was made or why a notification did or did not occur. If the organization cannot explain its reasoning, it may look careless even if the team acted responsibly. The incident register supports accountability by recording what was known at the time, what actions were taken, who owned those actions, and what evidence supported key conclusions. This does not mean the register needs to include every small detail, but it does need to capture the key facts and decisions that define the incident story. Accountability also includes timelines, because many obligations depend on time, and a register helps prove that the organization responded within required windows. Another accountability element is consistency, because different teams should not make drastically different decisions for similar incidents without a documented reason. The register gives leadership the ability to review decisions and ensure the program is operating fairly and predictably. For beginners, the main point is that accountability is easier when you record decisions while they are fresh rather than trying to reconstruct them later. A strong incident register begins with good classification, because classification is what allows comparison across incidents. Classification often includes incident type, such as misdirected disclosure, unauthorized access, lost device, misconfiguration, or vendor-related issue. It also includes data categories, such as contact information, identifiers, financial data, or other sensitive elements, because impact depends on what data was involved. Classification may also include the affected population, such as customers, employees, or applicants, because obligations and expectations can differ by context. Another helpful classification angle is the incident source, meaning whether it was caused by human error, process failure, technical weakness, or external malicious action. Classification should be consistent, because inconsistency makes trends misleading. If one team labels a misdirected email as a breach while another labels it as a minor issue, the program will not be able to measure reality accurately. A register should also capture severity in a consistent way, such as low, medium, or high, with clear criteria tied to likelihood and impact. Severity should not be based on embarrassment or media interest alone, but on risk to individuals and the organization. For beginners, classification is like labeling books in a library. Without labels, you cannot find patterns or compare history, and the register becomes a pile of stories instead of a usable tool. The register should also include a clear record of assessment, which is the phase where the incident's scope is clarified and key uncertainties are resolved. Assessment records include what happened, when it happened, how it was detected, and what evidence supports those findings. They also include the initial scope, which may change over time as investigation reveals more, and that evolution should be captured so later readers understand why earlier statements were different. A good register notes what is confirmed, what is suspected, and what is unknown, because mixing these together can make the record misleading. Assessment also includes the impact analysis, meaning who might be affected and what kinds of harm could result, because that analysis often drives notification decisions. If an incident involved exposure of data but there is no evidence it was accessed, the assessment should reflect that nuance without overstating certainty. If an incident involved a vendor, assessment should capture what information the vendor provided and whether there are dependencies on vendor investigation. The register can also include key decisions made during assessment, such as whether the event was escalated, whether a formal incident response process was activated, and who was assigned to lead. For beginners, the key is that assessment is not just an internal thought process. It should be visible in the register so others can understand the reasoning and timeline. Containment actions should be recorded in the incident register in a way that makes clear what was done to stop ongoing exposure and why those actions were chosen. Containment entries should include the time the action was taken, who executed it, and what evidence confirms containment was effective. For example, if access settings were changed, the register should record that access was restricted and that the exposure window was closed. If an account was compromised, the register should record that access was disabled and credentials were reset, along with the time those actions occurred. Containment records should also include any trade-offs, such as whether a service was temporarily limited to reduce risk, because those decisions may be questioned later by business stakeholders. Another important containment record is evidence preservation, because keeping logs and other evidence is essential for later investigation and defensibility. If evidence might have been lost, that should also be recorded honestly, because it affects confidence in conclusions. For beginners, it helps to see containment records as proof that the organization acted quickly and responsibly to reduce harm. Without that proof, an incident register can look like an academic summary rather than a response record. Remediation tracking is where an incident register becomes a bridge to continuous improvement, because remediation is the part that prevents recurrence. The register should capture what the root cause was, what contributing factors existed, and what corrective actions were defined. Corrective actions should be recorded with owners, target dates, and clear definitions of completion so they can be tracked to closure. It is common for remediation to include both immediate fixes and longer-term improvements, and the register should capture both because long-term improvements are often where the strongest risk reduction happens. The register should also capture validation, meaning whether the organization confirmed that the remediation actually worked and did not introduce new issues. If remediation requires coordination with a vendor, the register should record vendor commitments and follow-up evidence that actions were completed. This is also where exceptions and risk acceptance can appear, because sometimes remediation is delayed or partial, and leadership may accept residual risk temporarily. Those decisions should be recorded so they remain visible and do not become silent drift. For beginners, the key is that without remediation tracking, an incident register becomes a history book rather than a management tool. With remediation tracking, it becomes a system for making sure incidents lead to real improvements. Notification and communication records are another important part of the register because they often carry legal and reputational consequences. The register should capture whether notification was required, who was notified, when notification occurred, and what information was included at the time. It should also capture the decision reasoning, especially when the organization decided not to notify, because that decision may be challenged later. Communication records should also capture internal stakeholder updates, such as when executives were informed and what decisions were requested, because those details support accountability. If communications were staged, meaning initial notice followed by later updates, the register should capture that sequence so the timeline is clear. It should also capture any feedback received, such as questions from regulators or concerns raised by partners, because that can influence remediation and future controls. Another key point is consistency, because external communications should align with the facts recorded in the incident register. If the register says one thing and the external message says another, the organization's credibility suffers. For beginners, the main lesson is that communication decisions are part of incident response, and they need the same level of documentation as containment and remediation. The register ensures communication can be defended and reviewed later. To support continuous improvement, the register must allow analysis across incidents, which means it needs fields that make trend analysis possible. Trends might include repeated incident types, repeated systems involved, repeated vendors involved, or repeated causes like misconfiguration and human error. Trends might also include timing patterns, such as incidents occurring after system changes, during major releases, or during staffing transitions. The register also allows measurement of operational performance, like time to detect, time to contain, time to remediate, and rate of recurring incidents. These measures help the program identify weak points, such as slow escalation paths or unclear responsibilities. Importantly, trend analysis should be used to improve systems and processes, not to punish individuals, because punitive use of registers often causes underreporting. Continuous improvement works best when people feel safe reporting issues early, because early reporting allows containment before harm expands. The incident register should therefore be treated as a learning tool that supports better controls, better training, and better monitoring. For beginners, it helps to see trend analysis as the reason the register exists beyond compliance. Without trend analysis, you can still respond to each incident, but you will struggle to reduce the overall incident rate over time. Maintaining an incident register also requires careful attention to data minimization and confidentiality, because the register itself can become a sensitive data set. Incident records may include descriptions of personal data involved, affected individuals, and evidence from systems, and that information must be protected. A mature program controls access to the register, limits inclusion of personal data to what is necessary, and uses references rather than copying data whenever possible. For example, rather than pasting large amounts of personal data into the register, the record can note what categories were involved and where evidence is stored securely. This reduces the risk that the incident register becomes a new source of exposure. The register should also handle retention thoughtfully, because incident records may need to be retained for accountability and legal defense, but they should not be kept forever without purpose. The program should also ensure the register is resilient, meaning it is not dependent on one person's file system or one team's memory. The register should be maintained as an official record with consistent controls. For beginners, this is an important irony to understand. The register that helps manage privacy risk must itself be managed with privacy protections. When the register is protected appropriately, it supports accountability without creating new risk. Another element that supports accountability is closure discipline, because incidents should not stay open indefinitely without reason. Closure discipline means defining what it means for an incident to be resolved, which usually includes containment completed, assessment finalized, notifications completed if required, remediation actions defined and tracked, and key documentation completed. Sometimes remediation actions extend beyond closure, but even then, The register should clearly separate the incident resolution from ongoing improvement tasks, so accountability is not lost. Closure also includes a final review of what happened and what was learned, sometimes called a lessons learned review, and the register should capture the conclusions of that review. If a similar incident happens later, the register should make it easy to find what was done last time and whether it worked. Closure discipline prevents the program from carrying invisible risk because open incidents can become forgotten, especially when staff change or priorities shift. It also helps leadership understand the program's workload and progress. For beginners, the key is that closure is not about pretending everything is fine. It is about ensuring the incident has been handled in a complete, documented way, with ongoing actions visible and owned. As we wrap up, maintaining an incident register is a foundational privacy program practice because it supports both accountability and continuous improvement in a concrete way. It captures consistent classification, assessment, containment actions, remediation tracking, and communication decisions so incidents can be understood, defended, and learned from. It provides evidence that the organization acted responsibly and that decisions were based on facts available at the time. It also makes trends visible, which allows the program to identify recurring weaknesses and invest in controls that reduce future risk. A strong register is structured enough to support analysis, but careful enough to minimize sensitive data and protect confidentiality. For brand new learners, the most important takeaway is that incidents are not just emergencies to survive. They are opportunities to learn, improve, and prove the program's maturity. But that only happens if the organization remembers what occurred and follows through. The incident register is how the organization remembers, and when it is maintained well, it becomes one of the strongest tools for making privacy protection more reliable over time.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.